I am looking out the window of our studios here at Chesterton Radio in Atchison, Kansas, and I have to tell you, the world has completely disappeared.
It really has, hasn't it? Just vanished.
Completely. It is real past midnight. There's this massive, heavy storm system churning over the plains, and the fog is so incredibly thick, it's pressing right up against the glass like what? Like wet wool.
Yeah, it's quite isolating.
It is. Down below, if I press my face right up to the window, I can just barely make out the runway lights glowing, these hazy little orange halos bleeding through the mist. And somewhere up there, completely swallowed by that absolute suffocating blackness, is the distant hum of a solitary propeller plane.
You can just barely hear it over the wind.
Right. And inside the studio with us, there's just this soft, warm crackle of radio static. I mean, it feels less like we are doing a broadcast and more like we are holding a vigil.
It really does. I mean, it's the absolute perfect atmospheric backdrop for the mission we are embarking on tonight.
Absolutely, because we're broadcasting into the fog tonight with a very specific mission. We are taking a deep dive into a massive stack of vintage radio scripts, archival live broadcasts, and historical audio to understand how early aviation just, well, utterly terrified and captivated the world.
Right. We've gathered an extraordinary collection here.
We really have. From dramas like Suspense and Only Angels Have Wings to real-time historical broadcasts like H.V. Coltonborn's Pearl Harbor coverage. We want to look at how classic radio, using absolutely nothing but sound, voices, and static, managed to capture the mythology of the machine age.
And it is a profound mythology, isn't it? Because when you think about the architecture of the modern world, you usually picture terrestrial things. Glass skyscrapers, concrete, fiber optic cables buried under the oceans.
Right, things that are solid.
Exactly. Mapped, anchored things. But if you really want to understand the soul of the 20th century, the precise moment when humanity stepped off the edge of the known map, you have to look up into the dark. You have to leave the ground entirely.
And as we're going to see from these broadcasts, stepping off that map is a profoundly disorienting, isolating experience.
Oh, completely shatteringly so.
We are talking to you, the listener, as fellow night owls tonight. Imagine you are sitting in your living room in the 1930s or 40s. The sky isn't just a roof anymore.
No, it's a frontier.
Right. The psychology of stepping into a tin can, hurling yourself into the sky, and relying entirely on this invisible thread of radio waves to find your way back to Earth, it changes the human psyche.
It absolutely does. And over the course of this deep dive, we're going to unpack the entire spectrum of this evolution. We will start with the raw, terrifying isolation of early flight, the lonely cockpits and the ground controllers desperately trying to save them. Then we'll examine the psychological armor, that sort of clinical detachment of the modern cowboys who flew the early airmail routes.
The ones taking those insane risks.
Exactly. And from there, we have to talk about what happens when you industrialize that terror. The bomber crews of the Second World War flying into the meat grinder of the Ruhr Valley, and the engineers who sacrificed their own lives to build those machines.
And ultimately, we'll see how the medium of radio itself was the absolutely perfect vessel for this era, because radio, exactly like flight, is a conquest of invisible space.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
It conjures the infinite, terrifying expanse of the sky directly in the mind of the listener.
Well, let's step right into that terrifying expanse, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's move out of this cozy, fog-bound studio in Kansas and into the absolute total isolation of a cockpit in heavy weather. Because when you are up there and the clouds close in around you, radio communication isn't just some technical convenience.
No, it's a lifeline.
It is literally the fragile tether between life and death. And nowhere is that tether stretched tighter than in an incredible episode of the classic radio drama Suspense, an episode titled The Long Night.
Oh, this production just shreds your nerves. It really does. It is a masterpiece of audio tension.
The production techniques are flawless. I mean, it drops us into a scenario that was terrifyingly common back then and incredibly deadly. You have this inexperienced pilot flying a Beechcraft, N91457, hopelessly lost above a solid, impenetrable layer of fog over the Mississippi Valley.
And just to raise the emotional stakes to an almost unbearable degree, he has his sick, terrified little boy sitting in the passenger seat.
Right. And what makes the radio soundscape so effective here is how it creates claustrophobia. You hear this constant, unrelenting, droning engine sound in the background. It's a perpetual reminder of the physical peril.
It never stops. It just grinds on your nerves.
Exactly. But the real drama, the actual narrative focus, doesn't take place in the sky. It happens in Rockford Tower. The air traffic controller is standing in this chaotic, crowded room. You hear a babble of overlapping, highly technical voices in the background.
Right, the routine chatter.
Yeah, things like United 404 requesting lower altitude, or TWA 70 requesting weather. And then, cutting right through that routine static, comes this voice of pure, unadulterated panic.
The father.
Yes, a pilot whose automatic direction finder has failed. He's been circling for hours, and he has exactly 45 minutes of fuel left.
Wait, let's pause here for a second. I need to understand the mechanics here because the broadcast throws these terms around, assuming a 1940s audience just knew them.
Sure.
For those of us who aren't pilots, what exactly is an automatic direction finder, or ADF? Why is it failing such a death sentence?
That's a crucial point, actually. An ADF is essentially an early radio compass. Imagine a normal compass needle, but instead of pointing to magnetic north, it points to a specific radio transmitter on the ground.
Okay.
Pilots would tune the ADF to a commercial AM radio station or a specific aviation beacon in the city they were flying to, and they would literally just follow the needle to the source of the music or the signal.
So it's like walking through a dark forest by just listening for the sound of a very loud boombox and walking toward it.
That is exactly it. But in heavy thunderstorms, the static electricity in the clouds can overpower the radio signals.
Oh, no.
Yes, the needle on the ADF will stop pointing at the radio station and start pointing at the lightning strikes instead. The compass goes entirely crazy. Suddenly, you have absolutely no idea what direction you're flying.
Which brings us to the emotional flip of this broadcast, which is where it gets really interesting for me. Because the drama completely shifts our perspective. We aren't just feeling the panic of the pilot in the sky. We are trapped in the psychological agony of the air traffic controller on the ground.
The controller is our anchor.
Right. He is standing on solid ground, sweating under the fluorescent lights of this crowded tower, looking at a clock on the wall, literally ticking down the 45 minutes of fuel.
He knows what's coming.
He realizes he has to talk a complete stranger through a blind descent into a solid layer of clouds.
And he spills out the grim mathematics of the situation for the listener, which is just dreadful. The ceiling is 600 feet. Visibility is 1 mile in smoke and haze. The pilot has absolutely no instrument training.
Not at all.
Right, so the controller is listening to this panicked father, and he literally has to suppress the urge to scream at the man for taking a child up in weather suitable only for seasoned professionals. But there is no time for hindsight. There is only the microphone button.
The intimacy of that radio connection is staggering to me. It's one voice in the dark holding on to another.
Very much so.
The controller has to instruct this terrified father to trim the plane, set it for a 500 foot per minute descent, and then, and this is the part that genuinely gave me chills when I listened to it, he tells him to take his hands off the controls.
Yes. Fly with your hands off.
Fly with your hands off. But again, let's break that down because it sounds completely counterintuitive. Why tell a pilot who is about to crash to let go of the steering wheel? And what does it mean to trim the plane?
Right, so trimming an aircraft is basically aerodynamic cruise control. You're adjusting small tabs on the flight surfaces, so the plane maintains a specific pitch and speed without the pilot having to constantly pull or push on the yoke.
Okay, so it balances it.
It's like balancing a seesaw perfectly, so you don't have to hold it level. You set the trim, and the plane essentially flies itself in a stable descent.
Okay, but why does he have to take his hands off?
Because the moment that pilot enters the solid clouds, his eyes become utterly useless and his inner ear takes over. And the inner ear is a terrible liar.
A liar! How so?
Inside your ear, you have semicircular canals filled with fluid. When you bank or turn, the fluid moves, telling your brain you're turning. But in a plane, if you hold a steady turn for a few seconds, the fluid catches up and stops moving.
Oh, wow.
Your brain suddenly thinks you are flying straight and level, even though you are banked at a 45-degree angle.
Wait, it's the exact same physiology as when you spin around in an office chair with your eyes closed, and when the chair stops, you feel like you are violently spinning in the opposite direction.
Exactly. Spot on. It's called spatial disorientation, or vertigo. If that father kept his hands on the controls inside the cloud, his brain would scream at him that the plane was banking or diving.
And you try to fix it.
Yes, he would instinctively try to correct it by pulling back or turning the wheel. And he would inadvertently drive the plane into a fatal spiral, completely overriding the stable trim. He has to trust the machine, and he has to trust the disembodied voice from Rockford Tower more than his own physical body.
That is utterly terrifying. To be told your own senses will betray you, and your only salvation is a voice coming out of a metal box.
And the broadcast uses audio so brilliantly here to convey that. The agonizing silences.
Oh, the silences are the worst part.
The controller gives a command, and then the radio just goes dead, just static. The listener is left hanging in that dreadful void for 10, 20 seconds, waiting to see if the pilot survived the maneuver, or if he broke through the cloud layer, or if he just spiraled into the ground.
It is an incredible demonstration of how radio uses the absence of sound to create suspense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reminds me so much of another broadcast from our stack, Wings in the Dark, the Silver Theater production with Cary Grant.
Oh, yes.
But there's a fascinating thematic contrast here. In The Long Night, the radio is a conduit for sheer, visceral terror and raw survival. In Wings in the Dark, it's almost a technical romance.
Yes. Let's talk about Wings in the Dark. Cary Grant plays Ken Morgan, who has spent years developing an automatic blind flying device.
Right.
And Sheila Mason, the stunt pilot, is lost in a massive fog bank over the Atlantic off the coast of Halifax. She's running out of gas, and Ken has to guide her in.
The historical context for this is brilliant, actually. Because in 1929, Jimmy Doolittle performed the first successful blind flight using early gyroscopic instruments. Ken Morgan's fictional device is based directly on that real engineering triumph.
Right, but the psychological dynamic is totally different than the Beechcraft pilot. Sheila is a seasoned professional. She's not panicking like the father.
No, she's perfectly calm.
She is entirely reliant on Ken's voice, yes, but also on the tactile instrument dials he invented. He's telling her to literally feel the dials with her fingers. It's a highly capable woman entrusting her life to the engineering genius of the man on the ground. The radio tether there is about trust, scientific triumph, and competence.
If we look at the third piece in this thematic trio of Lost Pilots, Misty Mountain, featuring Jimmy Stewart as Rusty Lane, this one takes the isolation of the cockpit and introduces an element of almost mythic romance.
Oh, I adore this one. Rusty is a transport pilot flying over this desolate, rugged terrain. And he routinely strikes up a conversation over his radio with the mysterious ham operator, Mary Lou, broadcasting from W6RX2.
All right, W6RX2.
She lives hidden away in a cabin in the peaks, above the timberline. They've never seen each other. She is quite literally just a voice out of the ether.
What's fascinating here is the climax. Rusty is blinded by a massive storm, his instruments are useless, and Mary Lou has to guide him to an emergency landing strip.
But she doesn't use radar.
No, she doesn't have radar, and she doesn't have Ken Morgan's tactile dials. She does it purely by standing outside in the storm, listening to the sound of his engines, and telling him when to turn based on where the roar is coming from.
Okay, hold on. We have to unpack the physics of that. How is that physically possible in a blinding storm?
It relies heavily on the Doppler effect in acoustics. Before radar was invented, militaries actually used massive concrete acoustic mirrors, literally giant satellite dishes, for sound to hear approaching aircraft.
Oh, I've seen pictures of those on the coast of England.
Yes. In a quiet, mountainous area, a practiced ear can triangulate the direction of an engine. As the plane flies towards you, the pitch of the engine sounds higher. The moment it passes you, the pitch drops.
Right, like an ambulance siren.
Exactly. Mary Lou is using her own ears as an acoustic mirror, telling him, you're getting louder, turn right. Okay, the pitch just dropped, you overshot, come back.
It's so beautiful. So let me put a theory to you. When I listen to these three broadcasts together, The Long Night, Wings in the Dark, and Misty Mountain, I can't help but feel that these ground controllers and ham operators are functioning almost like secular priests.
Secular priests? I'm not sure I follow the theology there.
Well, think about the architecture of a Catholic confessional. It's dark, it's isolated, you're stripped of all your earthly pretenses, you can't see the priest. A cockpit is the confessional box, and the radio is the screen between the penitent and the priest. The pilot speaks into the void, confessing their location, their dwindling fuel, their deepest terror. And on the other end is this disembodied, authoritative voice offering salvation.
Offering grace through a wire.
Exactly. They offer grace through a wire to souls suspended in the dark. If you follow my voice, if you have faith in what I am telling you, you will be saved.
That is actually a remarkable analogy. It perfectly captures the psychological mechanism of why these radio dramas resonate so deeply. The technology of aviation severed us from the earth physically, but the technology of radio created a spiritual, almost divine lifeline back to humanity.
But of course, you can't always rely on the voice in the dark. Sometimes the radio cuts out. Sometimes the ice on the wings is too heavy.
Right.
And that brings us to the men who flew these early machines and the immense psychological toll it took on them. Let's transition from the vulnerability of the lone pilot to the psychological armor they had to build just to survive the reality of early flight.
We are moving into the era of what we might call the Knights of the Machine Age, the early commercial and military aviators of the 1920s and 30s. The culture they built was intensely rugged and profoundly fatalistic. And no production captures this better than the Campbell Playhouse adaptation of Only Angels Have Wings, starring and directed by Orson Welles.
The atmosphere of this production is dripping with humidity and dread. It's set in Barranca, this steamy, godforsaken South American port town with a dirt runway sandwiched between the ocean and an impassable, fog-choked mountain range.
Historically, this perfectly represents the era of early airmail routes. In the U.S., after the Kelly Act of 1925 allowed private contractors to fly the mail, these commercial aviators were taking completely insane risks.
Oh, beyond insane.
We're talking about flying planes made essentially of canvas fabric doped over wooden frames, with early liquid-cooled engines that were prone to freezing or boiling over. They had virtually no weather forecasting. They were flying through mountain passes for $1.50 a mile.
And Orson Welles captures that perfectly.
He captures the cinematic pacing brilliantly on radio. You hear the torrential rain, the clinking glasses in the Dutchman's Cafe, the sudden strained roar of an engine attempting the pass.
But the emotional core of this story, and this is where I think the real genius lies, is what absolutely shatters me. We meet Jeff Carter, the head of the airline, and his crew of pilots. And there is a chilling scene early on. A young pilot named Joe goes up in terrible weather because the airline needs to secure a lucrative government contract. He gets disoriented in the fog, hits a tree, and dies in a fiery crash right on the edge of the runway.
And the reaction of the crew is what defines that macho culture.
Well, I have to disagree with how you're framing that. I really do. You call it macho culture. I read it totally differently.
Oh, no, really?
Let's look at the scene. A showgirl named Bonnie Lee is stranded in the town, and she is horrified by the crash. She expects a funeral, mourning, grief. Instead, Jeff Carter walks right back into the cafe, sits down at the exact table where Joe was eating just minutes before, pulls Joe's steak over to his side and starts eating it.
Right, which is brutal.
And when someone mentions Joe, Jeff looks up blankly and asks, "Who's Joe?"
It is a stunning display of callousness. It's pure bravado.
But it's not truly callousness and it's not bravado. If they were truly macho, wouldn't they be boasting? Wouldn't they be pouring a drink out for their fallen brother and talking about how brave he was?
Well, that's one way to look at it, sure.
Jeff isn't a sociopath. He's a man who fiercely loves his friends. But to survive in a profession where your best friend can be turned to ash in a split second because the wind shifted 2 degrees, you have to perform an emotional amputation.
Ah. An emotional amputation.
Yes. If Jeff allows himself to feel Joe's death, if he lets the grief penetrate his psyche, his hands will shake. He will second-guess his instruments. He will never be able to step into a cockpit again. He has to literally erase Joe from existence to keep flying. It is a clinical detachment born of pure terror.
Okay, that's a very fair pushback, actually.
Yeah.
The emotional suppression was a survival mechanism, a necessary armor. And if we shift the timeline slightly forward to the military training grounds of Randolph Field in Texas, as depicted in the Lux Radio Theater's I Wanted Wings, we see how the military institutionalized that exact same psychological pressure.
Right. This is where the romance of the rogue male pilot hits the industrial meat grinder of military training.
Exactly. At Randolph Field, they were turning out the pilots who would eventually fly the heavy bombers and fighters of World War II. And the attrition was brutal.
Just terrible odds.
The commanding officer looks at the fresh cadets and tells them point blank, look to your left, look to your right. In 4 months, one of you won't be here. It was a rigorous 1 in 3 washout rate.
Wow.
And it wasn't just physical skill. It was an immense intellectual hurdle. They had to understand meteorology, complex navigation, and the deeply unforgiving physics of flight. The script specifically mentions concepts like catastrophic instability.
Now let's do exactly what we did with the ADF. Explain catastrophic instability to me, because that phrase alone sounds like a nightmare.
It's all about the center of gravity versus the center of lift. Think about a dart. A dart has a heavy metal tip, the center of gravity at the front, and the fins, the center of lift at the back.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you throw it, it naturally wants to fly straight. If a gust of wind hits it, the fins catch the air and drag the heavy nose back into alignment. That is aerodynamic stability.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, imagine trying to throw that dart backward. Heavy end in the back, fins in the front. The moment a gust of wind hits it, The fins will violently flip the entire thing around to put the heavy end forward. That is catastrophic instability.
Oh, good heavens.
In early aircraft design, or if a plane was loaded incorrectly with cargo, the center of gravity could shift too far back. It becomes like trying to balance a pencil on its tip on a moving train or pushing a shopping cart backward where the swivel wheels violently snap around.
Just totally uncontrollable.
Yes. The moment the nose pitches up even a fraction of an inch, the aerodynamics violently force it the rest of the way, flipping the plane into an unrecoverable stall.
So these young men, mostly in their early 20s, are dealing with the constant looming threat that if they make a millimeter of mathematical error, the plane will violently flip itself out of the sky.
Yes. And the mental pressure cracked them in different ways. We follow these cadets. Al Ludlow, this tough working-class mechanic who is desperate to prove he isn't a failure, and Jeff Young, a wealthy, polished Yale man who seems to have it all.
But beneath the surface, they are all terrified.
Absolutely.
It's the hidden fears of the supposedly fearless. Al vents his anxieties through aggression and tension. But Jeff Young, the golden boy, harbors a paralyzing, secret fear of flying.
Which he hides perfectly.
Right. He confesses to Al that he once watched a friend burn alive in a crash, and he just stood there on the tarmac, completely frozen, unable to help.
And the climax of that story hinges on a profound sacrifice. Al Ludlow, who has fought so hard for his wings, actually takes the blame for a crashed flying fortress.
Such a heartbreaking moment.
It is. He ruins his own career so that Jeff Young, who finally conquered his fear during that emergency, can get his wings and fly for the Army. It's a tremendous act of brotherhood.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves the point we were just debating. These cowboys of the air weren't fearless at all.
No, I suppose they weren't.
The entire culture, the drinking, the fatalism, the who's Joe attitude at Barranca, the stoicism at Randolph Field, it was all just an emotional parachute. They were terrified young men pretending to be gods of the sky because the alternative was admitting they were soft meat in a highly unstable tin can.
I completely agree with your analysis now. The machinery of the 1930s and 40s was advancing at a terrifying pace. The engineering of the airplane was evolving far faster than the human nervous system could adapt to it.
We just weren't built for it.
We were putting emotionally complex, fragile human beings into machines that operated at the absolute edge of physics. The psychological armor was the only way the human mind could bridge that gap.
And unfortunately, that gap only widened when peacetime ended. The psychological toll of flight was about to be exponentially magnified. Let's transition from the individual heroics of the mail runs and the training fields into the industrialized collective terror of the bomber crews.
This brings us to a remarkable broadcast from Saturday Night Theater called Death Kiss Kate. We are leaving the sunny, rigorous skies of Randolph Field and entering the grim historical reality of the maximum effort raids over Germany.
The atmosphere of this play is just suffocating with dread. It's so incredibly dark.
The historical stage is set flawlessly. We are talking about the strategic bombing offensive. You'd have 700 aircraft, mostly heavy bombers like the Avro Lancaster, lumbering into the night sky to bomb Berlin or the Ruhr Valley.
The scale of it is hard to fathom.
And we have to understand the scale of the danger, too. Bomber Command had a staggering casualty rate. Roughly 44% of aircrew who served were killed.
My God.
The sound design in this broadcast is incredibly visceral. You hear the deafening, bone-rattling roar of the 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. You hear the chaotic, strained chatter on the intercom. You hear the master bomber calling out the Wanganui and Parramatta target indicators.
Stop right there. I know you love the technical details, but let's not leave the listener in the dark. What on earth are Wanganui and Parramatta target indicators?
Fair enough, fair enough. So flying at night over heavily defended, blacked-out Germany meant you couldn't see the factories you were supposed to bomb, especially if there was cloud cover.
Right.
So the British developed a system using specialized elite crews called Pathfinders. The Pathfinders would fly ahead of the main bomber stream, using early blind bombing radar systems like OBO or H2S to find the target through the clouds.
So the Pathfinders use radar, but the 600 bombers behind them don't have it.
Exactly. So the Pathfinders would drop massive, brilliantly colored flares that floated down slowly on parachutes. Parramatta was the code name for ground-marking flares if the weather was clear.
And Wanganui.
Wanganui was the code name for sky-marking flares that burned brightly above the clouds. Think of it like a lead boat dropping a massive neon dye pack into a muddy, turbulent river, so the hundreds of boats behind it know exactly where the hidden rocks are. The main bomber stream would just aim for the colored glow of the Wanganui flares.
It's ingenious, but it also paints a giant glowing target in the sky. And in Death Kiss Kate, the crew is caught in that nightmare. They are flying a Lancaster that has been shot to pieces over the Ruhr Valley, an area they darkly referred to as Happy Valley because the anti-aircraft fire, the flak, was so insanely dense.
The script mentions the terror of being coned by searchlights. If you were caught in the intersection of 3 or 4 master searchlights, you were brilliantly illuminated for the German night fighters.
Nowhere to hide.
The only way out was to execute a corkscrew starboard maneuver.
Which is what, exactly?
It was a brutal, stomach-churning, evasive maneuver. You dive sharply to the right, building up immense speed, then pull up hard into a climbing turn to the left, bleeding off the speed, and then dive right again.
That sounds physically agonizing.
You are literally flying a giant heavy bomber in a 3-dimensional corkscrew pattern down the sky to make it impossible for the night fighter to calculate where you'll be the next second. It put massive structural strain on the aircraft and threw the crew violently around the unpressurized cabin.
And in the play, they've survived the flak and the corkscrews, but barely. They are limping home over the freezing North Sea on 3 engines with a fire spreading on the starboard wing. But the real tension isn't just the mechanical failure, it's the psychological decay of the crew.
This is where the story takes a fascinating turn away from technology and straight into folklore and superstition.
Right. We are introduced to a local woman back in England named Sally West, who the aircrews have horribly nicknamed Death Kiss Kate.
The premise is brutal, really. Sally is ostracized by the entire bomber base because 3 of her previous pilot boyfriends died in action shortly after dating her.
The crew of our Lancaster Ron the Navigator, Patty, Frank, they discover mid-flight that their skipper, Peter, has been secretly seeing Sally, and they absolutely lose their minds.
They threaten a full-blown mutiny.
Yes, they refuse to fly with him. They genuinely, deeply believe that Sally carries the smell of death, that she is a literal supernatural curse.
And we have to analyze this in context. These were highly trained men. They were operating the most sophisticated, cutting-edge technological marvels of their era. They were navigating by complex celestial mathematics and oboe radar. Yet they reverted instantly to medieval superstition.
Well, again, I push back against the idea that they were just being foolish or ignorant. Think about what they were enduring psychologically.
Okay, go on.
They are flying 600 miles in the pitch dark. They are sitting in an unheated, unpressurized metal tube at minus 40 degrees, filled with thousands of pounds of high explosives and high-octane aviation fuel.
Right.
The difference between returning to the mess hall for breakfast eggs and being blown into vapor is decided by a totally random piece of flak shrapnel in the dark. It is pure, unadulterated chaos.
So you're arguing that the superstition serves a psychological purpose.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon called apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. The human mind simply cannot process pure randomness. It cannot accept that death is entirely arbitrary and meaningless.
That makes perfect sense.
Superstition is the mind's desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. If Sally West is a jinx, then there is a reason why planes fall out of the sky. It's a dark, horrible reason, but it's a rule. It's logic. Scapegoating this poor woman was psychologically easier for the crew than accepting their own utter, terrifying helplessness in the face of the German night fighters.
That psychological analysis makes the uncanny climax of the play even more haunting, actually.
It is incredibly eerie. The crew is doomed. They are losing altitude. The fire is spreading. They are preparing to ditch in the freezing Black Sea, which is almost certain death.
And meanwhile, back in England.
Meanwhile, back in England, Sally West is being crushed by the weight of this reputation. She actually begins to believe she's a curse. She believes that as long as she is alive, the man she loves is doomed.
And so she goes to the local railway station in the blackout.
She throws herself in front of the 114 train. She commits suicide to break the curse. And at that exact moment, 1:14 a.m., as noted on a broken clock in her apartment, the fire on the Lancaster's wing miraculously goes out.
The German night fighters lose them in the clouds.
Yes. The crew suddenly sees the flashing beacon of the English coast. They are saved at the exact minute she dies.
The play leaves it ambiguous. Was it a tragic, meaningless coincidence? Or did her blood sacrifice truly appease the gods of the air? It's a stunning piece of aviation mythology that bridges the gap between modern machinery and ancient pagan sacrifice.
And speaking of sacrifice, let's connect the men who flew these magnificent doomed machines to the men who sacrificed their lives to build them, because the intersection of cutting-edge technology and frail human limits is a massive recurring theme across these broadcasts.
Which brings us to Spitfire, the screen-yield theater production starring Basil Rathbone as R.J. Mitchell, the brilliant British aeronautical engineer.
This play is a heartbreaking look at the physical cost of creation.
It starts by establishing the historical catalyst perfectly. It's 1934, and Mitchell is on a holiday in Germany. He is invited to the Richthofen Club in Berlin. He's sitting there with high-ranking German aviation officials, and one of them casually but menacingly brags that the Versailles Treaty is dead.
Right.
He tells Mitchell that Germany is rapidly building an armada of 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 warplanes, and he delivers this chilling line over a polite drink. Guns have the last word.
You can just feel the ice water run through Mitchell's veins in that moment. He realizes right then, looking around this opulent club, that a storm of unimaginable violence is about to break over England.
And so he rushes back to his drawing board at Supermarine. He enters a desperate, feverish race against time to design a fighter plane that can intercept this coming armada. He envisions a plane that can do 400 miles an hour, turn on a sixpence, and carry an unprecedented 8 machine guns.
Let's talk about the engineering of that for a second, because the Spitfire is legendary, but what made it so special in 1934?
It was revolutionary because of its aerodynamics, specifically the elliptical wing. Most planes had straight or slightly tapered wings because they're easy to build, but Mitchell designed a wing shaped like a graceful, sweeping ellipse.
Why an ellipse, though?
Because it drastically minimizes something called induced drag at the wingtips. Imagine trying to slice through water with a wide, flat wooden paddle. It creates a ton of turbulence and drag.
Sure.
Now imagine slicing through that same water with a perfectly tapered needle. Mitchell's elliptical wing allowed the plane to slice through the air with minimal resistance, meaning the massive Rolls-Royce Merlin engine could push it to incredible speeds.
That's brilliant.
And crucially, that wide, curved wing provided enough internal space to house the ammunition belts for 8 Browning .303 machine guns without bulging out and ruining the aerodynamics. It was like putting a Formula One engine and an armory inside a Falcon.
But the tragedy of the play is deeply personal. As Mitchell is perfecting this invincible machine, he is diagnosed with a terminal illness. He is given months to live.
It's just dreadful timing.
His doctor begs him to stop working, to rest, to go to the sea. His wife Diana pleads with him, but he refuses. He knows that if he stalks to save himself, the Spitfire won't be built in time and England will fall.
The juxtaposition the play sets up is incredibly powerful.
It's the entire core of the drama. Mitchell is pouring every ounce of his failing life force into designing this invincible machine. He literally calls it a bird that breathes fire. The Spitfire is sleek, mathematically perfect, and immortal. And yet the biological machine of the man creating it is deteriorating, crumbling under the stress of late nights and relentless pressure.
And it culminates in the awe and deep melancholy of the test flight scene. The prototype is finally ready. The Merlin engine roars to life. But Mitchell isn't standing triumphantly on the tarmac with his chest puffed out.
No.
He is confined to a wheelchair, wrapped in heavy blankets, physically broken, listening to the roar of his creation tearing through the sky above the airfield.
He hears the sound of a Spitfire saving England, and he knows with absolute certainty that he has sacrificed his own life to give his country wings. He trades his breath for the roar of that engine.
You know, it points to the ultimate irony of the era. The machine age was heralded as humanity's grand triumph over nature. We were going to conquer the skies, conquer distance, conquer time itself.
That was the dream.
And yet it demanded the ultimate natural sacrifice: human blood, bone, and failing nervous systems to create and operate its masterpieces. The machines were perfect. The humans had to break themselves to keep up.
Let's take a breath, because that brings us to a profound shift in our deep dive. So far, we've been discussing dramatic representations of war and flight, actors reading beautifully written scripts about test pilots and bomber crews.
Right.
But radio wasn't just a theater of the mind. It was a real-time historical witness. It brought the raw, unpolished shock of history directly into the living room as it was happening.
We have to talk about H.V. Kaltenborn's broadcast on the afternoon of December 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor.
Yes. When you listen to this archival recording, you aren't hearing a polished news package with sound effects. You are hearing the literal fog of war unfolding in real time.
It's so tense.
Colton is practically reading the wire reports as they are being torn off the teletype machines and handed to him in the NBC newsroom. He notes the specific details as they come in, correcting himself, updating the audience. The first flash at 2:25 p.m. Reports of 50 unidentified planes flying at 20,000 feet over Oahu. Heavy smoke drifting up from Hickam Field.
And he points out this surreal, almost absurd juxtaposition. At the exact moment the bombs were falling on the Pacific Fleet, tearing battleships apart, Japanese envoys Nomura and Kurusu were standing in the State Department in Washington, D.C., politely discussing peace treaties.
It's a masterclass in broadcast journalism under pressure. But historically, it also represents a fundamental, terrifying shift in the human experience.
This is exactly what I mean about radio and aviation shrinking the world. I want you to imagine being a listener that Sunday afternoon. Before aviation reached this level, and before live radio networks spanned the globe, oceans were massive protective moats. America felt geographically isolated, safe. If a war started in Europe or Asia, it took weeks for the news to arrive by ship and years for armies to cross the water. But suddenly, ordinary families sitting in their parlors in the Midwest on a quiet Sunday were instantly tethered to unimaginable violence thousands of miles away. The illusion of distance was destroyed forever. The sky was no longer just a serene roof over our heads. It was a vector for instant destruction.
And the ghosts of that conflict are permanently etched into the airwaves. Which brings us to perhaps the most haunting piece of archival audio in our entire collection. Jack Benny aboard the Saratoga.
Oh, I can barely listen to this one without getting absolute chills. It is so heavy.
For context, this was a special episode of the Jack Benny program recorded live aboard the USS Saratoga, an elite, legendary aircraft carrier affectionately known by her crew as Sister Sarah. Jack Benny and his cast are doing their usual brilliant comedy routines.
And the crowd is just loving it.
The sailors are roaring with laughter. You hear whistles, applause. It sounds like a joyous, carefree occasion.
But history casts a terrible, crushing shadow over that laughter.
It does. Shortly after this broadcast was recorded, the Saratoga was deployed to the Battle of Iwo Jima. She suffered devastating, repeated kamikaze strikes. 123 of the men you hear laughing in that audience were killed.
It's just devastating.
And ultimately, the ship herself survived the war, only to be sent to the Bikini Atoll, where she was sunk as a target during the atomic bomb tests. Sent down to Davy Jones's locker.
It fundamentally transforms what is objectively a lighthearted comedy broadcast into a sacred, ghostly artifact. You are listening to an audio time capsule. You are hearing the joyous, vibrant laughter of doomed men.
It's profoundly melancholic.
You are hearing a legendary ship saying a final, unknowing farewell to the nation. It makes you realize that radio waves don't just travel through space. They travel through time, preserving these fragile moments of life right on the edge of the abyss.
That fragility, that proximity to the edge, is what pushes aviation beyond mere mechanics. We've talked about the terror, the engineering, the war. But that leads us to our final theme tonight, moving from the stark realities of history into the transcendent, almost spiritual qualities of flight.
The airplane as a gateway to the mystical.
Precisely. And no story captures this better than the Lux Radio Theater adaptation of James Hilton's magnificent novel, Lost Horizon.
This is a massive departure from the dogfights, the flak, and the bombing runs.
Very much so. We follow a British diplomat named Conway and his young, hot-headed subordinate, Mallinson. They are evacuating from a violent political uprising in Basil, and they board a small, unpressurized transport plane, expecting to be flown a few hundred miles to safety in India.
But it doesn't go quite to plan.
No. Hours into the flight, they realize the pilot isn't British. The plane has been hijacked. They are flying blindly over the most desolate, unforgiving, high-altitude terrain on Earth, the Karakorums, brushing past the crest of K2.
They are completely severed from the known map. The isolation must be physically overwhelming. In those unpressurized cabins at that altitude, the hypoxia, the lack of oxygen, would induce a dreamlike, lethargic state.
Yes. The dramatic setup strips them of all control. They are literally hostages to the sky, flying into the unknown until they finally run out of fuel and crash land in a snowy, isolated plateau in Tibet, where they are rescued and taken to the hidden utopian valley of Shangri-La.
Think about what the airplane represents here symbolically. It is a chariot. It removes humanity from the petty physical and political borders of the earth and delivers them into a mythical realm.
Quite.
In Lost Horizon, the awe of flight is about being completely severed from the Earth, crossing boundaries not just of geography, but of reality itself. When they are in that plane looking down at the moonlit ice of K2, they aren't just traveling, they are ascending.
It's a fascinating contrast to the bomber cruise over the Ruhr Valley, isn't it?
Exactly. And that is the ultimate profound truth about the machine age that this collection reveals. The bomber crews in Death Kiss Kate use the airplane to bring hell to Earth. They use the sky to deliver fire and ruin. But Conway and his fellow passengers in Lost Horizon found a plane taking them to heaven, to a paradise of peace and unnatural longevity. The airplane itself is an entirely neutral vessel. It has no morality of its own. It simply amplifies whatever humanity desires, whether that is absolute terrifying destruction or mystical salvation.
It amplifies a reach, for better or worse.
Yeah.
It shrinks the world to deliver bombs, but it expands the soul to reach Shangri-La.
And isn't that exactly what radio does?
Well, as we sit here in the studio watching the fog continue to roll over the Kansas plains, it's hard not to feel the weight of that. The static we hear crackling on these old broadcasts, the hisses and pops framing Cary Grant's voice or Jack Benny's audience. It really is like the sound of time itself.
It is. We've spent this deep dive exploring how a microphone and a transmitter could build an entire sky in the imagination of a listener. We've heard the lonely voices in the dark begging Rockford Tower for help.
We've seen the clinical detachment of pilots fending off fear in Barranca.
We've listened to the memory of doomed men laughing on a carrier deck. And we've traced humanity's ancient dream of flight realized in aluminum, fabric, and static. It is a lonely, beautiful symphony of voices traveling through the darkness long after the speakers themselves have faded away.
And so, we leave you with this final thought to ponder. The next time you are outside on a clear, quiet night and you look up to see a blinking light silently crossing the vast expanse of the dark sky, do you simply see a marvel of modern engineering? Or do you hear the echo of a solitary voice still whispering through the static, endlessly searching for a runway in the dark?